Welcome back to another deck profile on the second channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at another deck from 2010 format, another rogue deck in this case as well. This deck I think performs a little bit better than Leafeon and Charizard, which I have talked about so far. This is very much one of those good stuff put with other good stuff decks, but maybe not the highest potential that the cards could be at individually deck. So, you know, somehow the sum of their parts is maybe less. In this case, we're going to be talking about Gengar Kingdra Machamp. I'd say it was probably the third best Gengar deck in the 2010 format, behind Gengar C and Cursegar. So not the best way to play Gengar, maybe the best way to play Machamp though. And we'll get to looking at the list right away. Let's get into it without further ado. Starting off, we have 3 copies of Gastly. Gengar's our main attacker in this deck, and it helps to have a nice thick line. Gastly is of course very good for that pitch dark free attack, locking your opponent out of trainer cards during their next turn. Trainers at this time meant item cards, so rare candy and ball search, stuff like that, not supporter cards, not stadium. So notable that the attack is not just a full trainer lock. Diamond and Pearl had this different system of categorizing trainer cards. 3 copies of them is pretty good. Good resistance, a low HP, but also a useful Trick Gas attack that does 10 and switches you to the bench. We have another Pokemon that trainer locks where you can hit and run into that Pokemon. That's a pretty good option to Trick Gas to get some extra damage on the board. 2 copies of Haunter. Haunter has free retreat, and we like this one. There is Haunters with 80 HP. All the attacks on most of these Haunters suck, but Hypnosis is at least something where putting your opponent to sleep could potentially get something out of it. I have never won a game by using Hypnosis on Haunter to put my opponent to sleep, but I have stalled out a few turns that could have maybe gotten me into the game. Basically, all the other Haunters are complete dead weight. Do not play the 80 HP Haunters, they suck. They do not have free retreat, and the free retreat is the most important thing here. We want to be able to pivot around our board. Especially against SP decks, we want to be able to get our Machamp in the active spot, and against Evolution decks, we want to be able to get our Spiritomb into the active spot so we can Darkness Grace. So free retreat, very, very good. That's why you see this Haunter in 2010 decks instead of any of the others. Then we have 3 copies of Gengar. I'm going to put them a little lower because we're going to use this middle slot right here in just a second. Gengar is one of the strongest cards in the 2010 format. It's got that Feigning spell. When you attack into Gengar and you take a knockout with damage from an attack, Gengar gets to flip a coin. If heads, the defending Pokemon that attacked it is also knocked out. So keep in mind that there is some slight wording changes on this card, so sometimes I get questions about this, because it says the defending Pokemon is knocked out when it actually means the attacking Pokemon is knocked out. So if you, let's just say, use a hit and run attack like Magnezone's Gyro Ball that switches Magnezone to the bench when it attacks, Magnezone would still be knocked out if Feigning Spell got heads, because it is the attacking Pokemon, not the defending Pokemon. Doesn't matter what's in the active spot when the knockout happens, it matters what attacks. What that also means is that decks can get around Feigning Spell by using Uxie from Legends Awakened, which puts itself back into the deck because that attacking Pokemon is no longer on the board. So there is ups and downs to that being a clause. What is an insane up for Feigning Spell is that there's basically no way to turn it off. It is not turned off by Psychic Lock, it is not turned off by Psychic Bind. Almost none of the power lock effects spare, like Ampharos from Platinum, do anything to turn off Feigning Spell. So your opponent's going to have to deal with that. Gengar's main attack is Shadow Room. It snipes 30 and it snipes 60 if that Pokemon has a Poke Power. Now do keep in mind this is damage counters that is sniping, not damage. So you could snipe anywhere on their board for 30 or 60, depending on if you're hitting a Pokemon with Poke Power. But if you hit a Pokemon that is immune to effects of attacks because of Unown G being attached to them, it will do nothing. So do not hit Unown G, and that is a struggle for this deck. We will talk about that in a little bit. Poltergeist is also a pretty good sack. Poltergeist, 30 times the amount of trainers and supporter cards and stadium cards in your opponent's hand. So you get some hand knowledge, and sometimes you can just hit for a little bit bigger of a number. It's also not an effect. It is an actual damage, so this deck does not really get to maximize the use of Poltergeist in the way some other decks do. It is probably the least used attack in this deck compared to something like Cursegar, which can a little bit more effectively use that by eliminating the opponent's Claydol and then forcing them to draw cards eventually Poltergeist might actually be able to hit. In this deck, not as much. Free retreat is very good in this guy. Being able to pivot around the board is very important for this deck. But essentially, this is just a deck of different stage 2 attackers in the format that attack for 1 energy, and you can actually tech it out a little bit more if you'd like. But these are just the 3 best ones, frankly. 1 copy of Gengar LV.X to level up our Gengar into. We're just going to throw it there, that way it fits. Gengar LV.X has Level Down, which is an insanely good Poke Power that says once per turn, you can choose one of your opponent's Pokemon level X, and you take that level X off of that Pokemon and shuffle that level X into the deck. So you're essentially almost like a devolution. Of course, it's not. It's not an actual devolution, but it is an effect that is akin to devolving the opponent every single turn, just by getting rid of their level X. So that means you're reducing the amount of HP they have, which can open up the opportunity to take extra knockouts. You are also taking away their access to different kinds of, effects. Now, do beware that if you level down a Garchomp, you are devolving the Pokemon, removing the effect of Dragon Rush on that Pokemon. Dragon Rush puts an effect on Garchomp that says it can't be used two turns in a row unless you have a way to remove that effect, like, double switching or devolving, de-leveling up, the Pokemon. You do remove that effect, they can then level up again, Dragon Rush, and you're mad if you don't take that knockout. So do be careful about using Level Down. Sometimes it is not optimal to do so. However, Level Down is still an incredible piece of board control. You are breaking your opponent's deck more by shoving more cards into the deck. You're forcing them to expend more resources to get their level X's back. It is one of the best Poke Powers in the entire format. Also notable about Gengar is that 140 HP is massive. Frankly, too much. It really should be 130. Like Gardevoir goes from 110 to 130 with its level X. Why do we go from 110 to 140? I don't know. There's another Gengar from Arceus, I guess, that has 120 HP. Maybe that's their justification. The other attack is Compound Pain, which this deck can actually use very well. Compound Pain says this attack does 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon that already have damage counters on them. So this deck has the ability to spread damage, and you can later come back and use that damage. Now, against some decks, do keep in mind this deck does not want to spread damage against decks that use Nidoqueen or SP decks that use Garchomp C level X, because they can just heal the damage off their board. But against decks that don't have either of those factors, or if you can just keep them from coming into play, you can spread a lot of damage with this deck and then maybe Compound Pain later in the game. Next up is our Machamp line. Machamp's here to help with our SP matchup, which is otherwise a little ugly with just Gengar alone. 2 copies of Maslop. You run this one because he has 1 retreat cost, and that is better than having a 2 retreat cost. 10 for 1, whatever, who cares. 1 copy of Machoke. Machoke is okay. I've used Steady Punch before. 20 plus 20 on the heads is actually relevant damage. You can potentially knock out a Luxray GL if you get a heads, or if you have an expert belt, you can do 40, take a knockout. Risky, but not the worst stacker in the world. And then 2 copies of Machamp. Machamp is there for that takeout attack. Takeout says if the opponent's, or if the defending Pokemon is not evolved, it is knocked out instead of doing damage. Now do keep in mind this is another effect of an attack. So what happens when you use takeout is that the takeout instantly checks, okay, is this Pokemon evolved? Okay, it's a Gardevoir, it's evolved. I'm just going to do 40 damage. Whereas if you attack into, let's just say, a Regigigas, it checks, okay, Regigigas is not evolved. I'm going to turn, instead of doing damage, this is going to register as an effect, as a knockout effect. So do keep in mind that it takes away your damage completely, which means, again, Unown G will completely block the damage of your attack. So you do have to watch out for that. Unown G is a bit of a tough hand for this deck to deal with. Because both Shadow Room and Takeout, which are kind of our 2 best attacks, are blocked by Unown G. Now we do have ways around that we'll talk about. You also have damaging attacks. Some of those damaging attacks to keep in mind is Hurricane Punch. Hurricane Punch, for 2 energy, flip 4 coins. You do 30 times the number of heads. Completely unreliable, however, is a very good attack. It is an attack you will find yourself using fairly often against SP decks, because they will try to outlast you with an Unown G. You might get 1 KO with Takeout, but then the next Pokemon they bring up probably is going to have an Unown G attached if it's in their deck. And we have 1 copy of Machamp LV.X, which I'm just going to throw in there. I'll just sandwich him with the Machoke. Machamp LV.X, wow, we are really sandwiching him. Let's get that up a little bit. There we go. Machamp LV.X gives you an HP buff, plus 20 HP, but actually it's not really an HP buff because he has that no guard Pokebody that says attacks that Machamp does and attacks that Machamp takes do 60 more damage. So every time Machamp does an attack, it's doing more damage. Every time Machamp takes an attack, it does 60 more damage to Machamp. It essentially turns your Machamp into a glass cannon. This is useful because SP decks will, again, put a Pokemon with an Unown G attached in the active spot, and our takeout does nothing, and then we're just kind of forced to either find a switch out so we can start attacking with Gengar again, or we can go for a Hurricane Punch. Hurricane Punch, again, kind of unreliable on the damage output, but with a guaranteed plus 60, as long as you're doing at least one heads, you're doing 90 damage, then that's pretty good. Two heads, you're doing 120 damage. So that's where the real damage potential of Machamp kind of comes in, is with that level X card. Being able to turn what would otherwise just be a dead Pokemon that can't really do much with a weak Hurricane Punch or take out for literally nothing into an opportunity to score another KO, even if it probably means giving up your Machamp. Now, because you have that Pokebody, you cannot just throw Machamp LV.X into play whenever. You want to hold that for a moment when it is right. Machamp LV.X has a plus 40 weakness and has a plus 60 damage, so a Uxie Zen Blade will do 140 damage to your, yeah, it's 140, right? Yeah, 140. I've got my math right. Wait, no. Uxie Zen Blade will do 160, sorry, that's why it's relevant. We'll do 160 damage and kill Machamp instantly when he is leveled up, so be careful about that. Machamp's weakness is hard to play around, especially when you have the level X. That said, just be very, very careful with Machamp LV.X. You leverage it as a tool. It is not something you throw into play all the time. It is something you kind of throw in as a Hail Mary play. There's an attack on Machamp LV.X. It's pretty bad. I'm not even going to talk about it. It's a waste of time, frankly, because you don't rarely ever see it come up. 2 copies of Horsea. This is the better Horsea to play in 2010. I've seen some people going against the gospel of a Luxray and playing the Horsea from Unleashed, which has a ×2 lightning weakness and will die to a Luxray bite. You do not want to die to a Luxray bite. Plus 10 weakness means this Horsea lives Luxray bite. Does it live it comfortably? No. But does it live Luxray bite? Yes. Very good. Smokescreen is pretty good if your opponent tries to attack with the defending Pokemon. Again, an effect, so it can be blocked, but if they try to attack, they have to flip a coin. If tails, that attack does nothing. This is a very good attack to use on turn 1 if you have nothing else. Attaching an energy to a Horsea and using Smokescreen might get you another turn in the game. 50-50 shots, pretty good. I'll take it better than nothing. And Reverse Thrust doing 10 and switching is, again, useful. We don't have that many water energy in the deck, so it's hard to reliably use this attack, but again, you can hit and run into an item lock card, which we'll talk about in a little bit. 1 copy of Seadra. Again, I think this Seadra is much better than the other one. Less weakness amount, again, so you're not getting chunked for 60 by bite. You do still die to every other Luxray attack, no matter which Seadra you play. But I also like this Aqua Pump on this Seadra. I've always been a big fan of this attack. Aqua Pump does 30, and you may discard up to 2 waters from your hand. For each water you discard, you do 10 more damage. Now, this deck only plays 1 water energy, so it is very, very difficult to be able to do that extra discard, but hitting 1 for 30 is just a pretty solid amount of damage. A lot of basics in the format that are easily able to be KO'd, such as, let's just say, Magikarp and Hoppip and Unown Q have 30 HP. Being able to knock them out is pretty good. We also have Expert Belt in this deck, so we can do 50 damage with Aqua Pump. Again, this is a deck that can take that initiative with Aqua Pump. We only have 1 water energy, but we have ways to search it. There is many times where I have used Aqua Pump in different decks to take a knockout, whereas the other Seadra does 20 and 10 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Yes, it can be situationally useful, but no, you're probably not getting a knockout with that attack. 2 copies of Kingdra Prime. We do not play the other Kingdra. Maybe something you could consider if you want to try out the other Kingdra as another attacker. I think this Kingdra is good enough. He's not our even third attacker, I'd say, in the deck. Kingdra Prime is mostly here for that Spray Splash Poke Power, which says once during a turn you can put 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And this is a way to increase your damage of your Gengar. Again, we have that ability to spread lots of damage, so we can, maybe use Compound Pain later in the game. But we also have the ability to put 2 damage counters on a Claydol and then Shadow Room it to kill it, and instantly slow our opponent down with that. You have the ability to put damage counters on something like a Ralt while your opponent's still setting up, and then Shadow Room Gardevoir for a lot of damage, meaning that you now 2-shot the level X. There's all kinds of different things that Kingdra can help take your knockouts with, and it's also got a pretty useful attack. Dragon Steam does 60. If your opponent has any fire Pokemon in play, the attack only does 20. Fire Pokemon are not too common in 2010, but there is, of course, Entei Raikou Legend, and Blaziken FB, and Infernape, Infernape E4. Most of the stuff is restricted to SP decks, but you do occasionally see a fire Pokemon like Charizard every now and then, or Arceus or something like that. But in those matchups, Kingdra's not really much of an attacker anyway, so you're not too worried about it. Kingdra is just very good for that Spray Splash. We want the damage increase, and it's pretty good. Kingdra's damage increase is in fact so good that initially, when 2010 was added to TCG1, people were experimenting with pure Gengar Kingdra decks. So, like a 4-4 Gengar and 4-4 Kingdra trying to damage boost. Those kind of decks are cool, but they just do not have a good way to deal with SP. Once SP stops giving them free prizes, with their big SP Pokemon, you can't really deal with a Dialga that way. So, Kingdra, pretty good. We like him. Due to Claydol, we play the Fighting Baltoy because it's a good attack. It is better than the Psychic Baltoy in this deck. And then Claydol's got that Cosmic Power. Put up 2 cards from your hand in the bottom of your deck, then draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. It's the best draw Poke Power for these decks in this format that are Evolution decks. We want it. We are not trying to build a hand with lots of cards. We just want to see new cards when we can. Claydol is very good. Then we have our one-ofs. One of Uxie is a one-of in basically every 2010 deck. When you play it from your hand to your bench, draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. Very good extra draw support. In case our Claydol gets sprayed, or we lose our Claydol early, we have 1 extra out to getting some cards. And Uxie's also got a useful Psychic Restore attack, which does some damage and puts it back into the deck. Remember, that can get around an opposing Gengar's Feigning spell, though we also can use our own effects like Kingdra and like our own Shadow Room to get around that, but it is something I've done with this deck before, where they had a Gengar that could not be hit by Shadow Room because it was immune to effects, and I used Psychic Restore plus Kingdra to take the knockout. 1 copy of Azelf. Azelf's actually pretty good in this deck. We have that Time Walk that lets us look at our face-down prize cards, and then we get to find a Pokemon there and add it to our hand, and then we swap any 1 card from our hand back into the prizes. So let's just say here are my prize cards. Oh look, there's my Pokemon I really want from the prize cards. And I can put another card from my hand back in the prizes that I maybe don't need right now. And then the other thing it lets you do is it lets you rearrange your prizes. So it's like, okay, well, I really want Roseanne's Research as my next prize card. I'm going to put it down here. In casual play, people typically just look at their prize cards when they're taking them for the rest of the game, because it speeds up the process. But essentially you get access to the knowledge of where all your prize cards are for the rest of the game. Very, very good. Lockup is also a very good attack in this deck. Lockup does 20 and stops the opponent from retreating. This is really good in this deck because we have Kingdra. So what you can do is you can lock the opponent up, stick something that they don't want in the active spot, maybe like a Spiritomb or something like that. And then if they have no, if they're not getting any value out of it, or if they're playing something like Chatot, you can repeatedly Spray Splash their board while Lockup sticks them. If they have healing on the board, not very effective, but if they do not have any healing on the board, like Nidoqueen, you can apply extra damage with that Lockup Kingdra combo. And the best thing is that you can take the knockout on your turn with Spray Splash, potentially opening up that opportunity to lock even another Pokemon. Or they have to give you a Pokemon that could potentially, if they have to serve you up another Pokemon that can't be trapped, but they can't serve you up something useless because they don't want to get Lockup stuck again, you can potentially maybe feed a prize card to something like Machamp. 1 copy of Unown Q. Unown Q attaches to one of your Pokemon. You play it to your bench, then you attach it to one of your Pokemon as a tool card, and it gives them 1 less retreat. We've got a lot of guys with 1 retreat in this deck. We like to be able to move those around the board. Also helps us get into Spiritomb early in the game to help us set up. Speaking of Spiritomb, Spiritomb's got that item locked Poke Body. Each player is item locked, or trainer locked in this format. 1 is in the active spot. Very, very good for setting up, slowing down your opponent, and Darkness Grace helps us set up our deck. Search your deck for a Pokemon that evolves from one of your bench Pokemon and put it into play. Very, very good. We like being able to set up. We like being able to stop SP from playing their Power Spray. Every single evolution deck, besides Gyarados, should be playing one copy of Spiritomb. This is our main Pokemon lineup of the deck. Again, this is kind of a tough deck to tech with because there are already quite a lot of Pokemon. We have 3 Stage 2 lines. But back in the day, there was some talks about maybe adding a card like Jumpluff to this deck. Jumpluff is just a very powerful 1-energy attacker. That's something that you can consider if you want. You could also add a card like Nidoqueen to this deck. If you want some extra healing, turn your Gengar into a kind of a Gengar healing deck to avoid getting KO'd easily. That's also something you can do. There's also Dusknoir. Dusknoir has the ability to shuffle in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon if they have 3 or more. There are all sorts of different techs that you can potentially run in this deck. So consider those, but I'm frankly happy with these 3 Stage 2 lines. I think that this is very consistent and good. And adding more of those would potentially clunk things up, but we do have 2 specific tech cards that I play that we'll talk about later that you could maybe fit something in. 2 copies of Roseanne's Research. Search your deck for 2 name combination of basic Pokemon and basic energy. We want to find our basic energy throughout the game. That is very good. And we want to find our basic Pokemon in the early game. That is also very good. This deck only plays 5 basic energy, so having a card that's able to find the one we want, because we also have 3 different energy costs, being Fighting, Water, and Psychic. Very, very good. We like Roseanne's 4 of in most decks. The list that this deck was originally based on was James G's list, and James G played Pokemon Collector in this deck, and no basic energy cards. I didn't hate Pokemon Collector, but I am a huge fan of Roseanne's Research. Just the consistency that it offers throughout the entire game feels so good. Collector is strong in the early turns, but really falls off in usefulness. And also the deck struggled where if your opponent played something like a Power Spray or they Psychic Locked you with Gardevoir to turn off your Claydol, you had a really hard time finding your energy cards, so Roseanne really helps with that. 4 copies of Bebe's Search. Bebe puts any card from your hand on top of your deck, and then you search your deck for a Pokemon. This deck's got lots of Pokemon, and we want to find them. Bonus points that we can Bebe for our Claydol, and then we have less cards in hands because of Bebe putting a card back in the deck, so Claydol will draw some extra cards. Pro tip with Bebe, do not put the card that you hate the most in your hand back into the deck if you have a Claydol on your board, or if you're going to go get Claydol. When you're using Claydol, the 2 cards that you want to put to the bottom should be your least 2 favorite cards. So if I have 2 dead cards in my hand, those I want to go to the bottom. I don't want them shuffled back into the deck. Bebe a card that maybe isn't the most useful, but you wouldn't hate redrawing. And then put the 2 dead cards to the bottom of the deck once you get your Claydol. A little bit of pro tip knowledge there. And it really makes the difference. I mean, everyone messes it up, I feel like, in 2010. That is something that even the best players in 2010 sometimes make the mistake of, but it's something to be more conscious about if you want to win more games. 4 copies of Judge. Judge says each player shuffles away their hand and draws 4 cards. We like Judge. Judge is good hand disruption. This deck is great at taking out Claydols and then setting up disruption plays on our opponent's side of the board. And it's also great against SP, which otherwise just kind of solitaires you. If SP is doing everything they want each turn, you will have a hard time dealing with them. You realistically only are going to be able to set up maybe 3 Machamps a game. If they're just taking the knockout on Machamp every single turn, that can be tough. So we want to use Judge to hand disrupt decks like Gyarados and SP, and then against evolution decks, which usually don't have big hands, we can take out their Claydol and then hand disrupt them, and that will make it difficult for them to respond. It's also just a good draw card. We go down to 4 cards, and then Claydol draws us more. 4 copies of Rare Candy. Rare Candy's pretty necessary, of course, in a deck like this. I think we're going to put the item cards right here, so I think we can fit the energy cards. Yeah, we'll do the items right here. That's fine. 4 copies of Rare Candy. Rare Candy's good. We like getting our Stage 2s into play. Keep in mind this is Rare Candy of olden days, so it can be played on your first turn or the turn a Pokemon was put into play. Of course, you can't use it on the first turn going first because that player can't play trainer cards. However, on turn 1 going second, if you want, I can Rare Candy a Gengar out, immediately start sniping the opponent's board. That's something this deck does very well, is turn 1, get either a Machamp or a Gengar or Kingdra on the board and start swinging. Sometimes you're taking a prize, and sometimes that Gengar is sniping 30 on a Baltoy and letting them know if that they evolved a Claydol, that Claydol is dying to the next Shadow Room. So double Shadow Room on 1 on Baltoy, 1 on Claydol will do 90 damage for the knockout. There's another Gengar tip. 3 copies of Pokémon. This is a card where I could potentially see 4. If you just want to max out consistency, that's good. Pokémon puts any Pokemon from your hand back into your deck, and then you search your deck for another Pokemon. It's like a nerfed version of Bebe's Search as an item card. If you wanted to maybe run, let's just say, a 4th copy of Pokémon and cut one of the Bebes, I think that'd be fine. There is a lot of item lock, especially early in the game in 2010, though, so I like having those maxed Bebes. Bebe is never a bad card. We're never mad to see Bebe. It is a little slow if it is your opening supporter card, of course, but sometimes, you know, if you open up and your opponent has item lock, Bebe is really a lifesaver, and it's something, you know, whereas Pokémon gets turned off by item lock and can be a bit tough. We like Pokémon, though. Good card in this deck. 2 copies of Warp Point. I initially ran 4 in this deck, actually. My 2 tech slots just went to playing more Warp Point. Warp Point forces each player to switch, like escape rope. So your opponent switches, and then you switch. So this gives us knowledge, of course. Whatever our opponent promotes, we kind of get an idea of what we want to promote. But it's also nice because we have a lot of free retreaters, being Gengar and Unown Q, giving all of our guys free retreat besides Machamp and Claydol. So we can kind of wait to see what our opponent promotes, and then we can react. So if they promote something that's like a basic Pokemon, okay, maybe it's time for Machamp to come up and take a knockout. You know, maybe it's time to bring up Kingdra and take a knockout, something like that. One thing to also keep in mind is that if you can hide information from your opponent when using Warp Point, that's very good. Sometimes you're just trying to thin your hand down when you play Warp Point, sure. Sometimes you have to give information away. But if you can maybe, let's just say, hold the Machamp in your hand and then wait to play it down until you play Warp Point, and then your opponent says, okay, well, I don't think he has Machamp, so I'm going to promote a guy that dies to Machamp, and then you play down the Machamp, you're netting more progress off of that Machamp because they weren't ready for it. 2 copies of Warp Point feels good. I used to play 4 because I just had 2 extra slots in the deck that I've now kind of put towards teching. 4 played pretty good against SP. You always had a target for Machamp pretty much, which was good. I liked that. There are some downsides, of course, to deal with that, but that is pretty neat. You could play 4 if you want. 2 copies of Night Maintenance. Shuffle 3 in any combination of Pokemon and Basic Energy back into the deck. Now this is a card that's typically only played as a one-of in decks in 2010. Typically, the decks that I play, I think maybe Kingdra has 2, but otherwise, pretty much all of my decks have 1 Night Maintenance when they're evolution decks. Shuffling back Pokemon Energy is very good, but typically decks run Expert Belt, or SP decks have other ways to recover cards, so they don't have to worry about it. But typically, evolution decks are playing Expert Belt in pretty high counts, 2 copies usually, which means that their Pokemon, when they go down, are giving up multiple prize cards. And if our Pokemon are giving up multiple prize cards, that's probably the end of the game. In this deck, we are much less reliant on Expert Belt, being that a lot of our effects, or a lot of our attacks are effects, so we don't get that boosted Expert Belt damage. So we're not going to rely nearly as heavily on Expert Belt as other evolution decks do. Curse Scar, for instance, is almost entirely based off of Curse Gengar from Arceus using Shadow Skip with Expert Belt for 80 damage. That is your most important attack. This deck doesn't have that. Now we do have Compound Pain, and we do have Kingdra with the Swingdra, and we have Machamp LV.X. These are some damaging attacks that you can throw in the mix, but being that we're going to probably give up 6 prizes with 6 Pokemon, and 4 of them are probably big guys, we want Night Maintenance to put those back into the deck. Now we have some of our item card attacks. Well, we have 1 copy of Luxury Ball, first of all. No-brainer. Luxury Ball searches your deck for a Pokemon excluding level X and puts it into your hand. We have 2 level X's, but we have so many other Pokemon that are not level X's. I think 1 copy of Luxury Ball is warranted in this deck, just because it's so important to get that like stage 2s out quickly. Very, very good card. And then I have my 2 tech cards. Now, James G, with his build of the deck, I think played the optimal cards for this list, which is Tropical Tidal Wave. Tropical Tidal Wave is a promo card that says flip a coin. If heads, discard all trainer cards from your opponent's side of the board. If tails, discard all trainer cards from your side of the board. That would include Unown Q. He is a trainer card when he's attached in play. And basically the idea of that card is that it gets rid of Unown G, which prevents all effects of attacks. There's no way to get rid of Unown G because all the things that get rid of tool cards in this format are effects of attacks. So the only way to get rid of Unown G in the entire format is using Tropical Tidal Wave and flipping aheads. Now, I do think Tropical Tidal Wave is very good, and in fact, I like it. However, it is also a very, very, very expensive card. It is a World Championship promo. I cannot afford it in any language. It's like $500, even in like European languages. Like, this is a ridiculous card. So initially, like I said, I played 2 extra Warp Point, but I found that the deck didn't really need 4 Warp Point. In a lot of matchups, it was also bricking. When you get item locked and you have 4 Warp Point, you have a lot of dead cards. So I've chosen to add 2 tech cards to the deck. Your mileage may vary with these tech cards, but I think each of them is at least somewhat useful, and I'll also talk about what you can play instead. Our first deck here is Expert Belt. Expert Belt is a well-known card in 2010. Boosts the HP of your Pokemon is attached to by 20 and increases their damage by 20. Typically, I don't like playing only 1 copy in a deck, but again, most of our attacks do not use Expert Belt. It's just a nice, unexpected one-of in this deck that can help you score an extra knockout. So if you're playing in something like Dialga Chomp and their Dialga Chomp has an Unown G attached, you can devolve their Dialga and then go in with Machamp, and if you need to score that knockout, go in with the Expert Belted Hurricane Punch. You know, there's a better chance you're going to take a knockout there to win the game, you know, let's just say. Expert Belt is a game-winning card here. And then we have 1 copy of Technical Machine TS2 Devoluter. This is a card that I gained a lot of respect for playing Diamond and Pearl Stormfront, but it is not the best card in the world in this format. Technical Machine TS2 says, devolve one of your opponent's evolved Pokemon, excluding level X, and put that card into your hand. It's a free attack that devolves your opponent. However, it cannot devolve Pokemon, again, with Unown G attached, or it cannot devolve Pokemon that are leveled up. One of the things that this deck does uniquely is that we have Gengar level X, which levels down the opponent. So we can actually devolve a Pokemon that's leveled up. We just need to level them down and then devolve them. So that's a pretty cool combo this deck has access to. This deck, again, is very good at spreading damage around the board and setting up the opponent to be devolved. I was able to, in a game where I was playing against a Flyterra deck, I was able to win by devolving their Nidoqueen. That's primarily why the card's in the deck, by the way, is Nidoqueen. Nidoqueen's a pain in the ass for this deck because of its healing. I was able to Shadow Room the Nidoqueen and then continually Spray Splash it until it was at the range of 60 damage, and then devolve it out of play. And that is much easier than using like 2 more Shadow Rooms plus more Spray Splashes. And removing the Nidoqueen from my opponent's board completely ruined any chance they had of winning the game, which was pretty strong. This can be also just a good card for slowing your opponent down. If your opponent just rare candies a Pokemon into play, you can devolve it to potentially slow them down. They have to use another rare candy or to start manually evolving again. It's not the most useful card in this format, especially compared to Diamond and Pearl Cities, where it is a central card, but it is another attacking option nonetheless. The other thing that you could play in this slot is a 1/1 Starmie. Starmie is an interesting card that saw some play in Stargar in 2009, a variant of Gengar. And what the Starmie does is it snipes 50 on one of your opponent's Pokemon with Poke Powers or Poke Bodies. Now it's similar to Gengar Shadow Room, but it also hits Pokemon with Poke Bodies, and it is damage, so it goes through Unown G. So that is another option. You can add Starmie. But I think 50 damage is just a little short. We want to do like 60 damage so that we can double, snipe like a Claydol and then hit it for 60. We don't really want to do 50 because then that's extra progress. It's a low HP Pokemon. You could add it. I am considering it at points because it sounds fun, but I don't think it's the best option. I do like 1 Expert Belt. You could maybe come up with a better card for TS2. Or you could just spend $1,000 on Tidal Waves. Going into our energy lineup, we have 3 copies of Psychic. That is our best energy for Gengar, so we run 3 copies. We have 2 multis, my favorite reverse holo. You can tell I like this deck because I use the multi-energy reverses, and I use my favorite Emerald energy cards, which are my favorite basic energies. So you can tell I like this deck quite a lot. And then we have 1 of each Fighting and Water energy. Just for searchability, multi-energy covers those different types of energies as long as you don't have 2 special energy attached. We only have 2 multis in the deck, and most of our attacks are 1 energy, so multi feels very good. Again, the deck I based this off of was James G's list, and he ran 4 Rainbow and 4 multi. That is a way you can approach it, but I find it a little bit hard to use some of those bigger attacks like the Compound Pain when you're doing that, and the damage recoil from Rainbow Energy is very, very relevant. Pokemon is always a game of inches. Damage recoil is always tough to take on, especially when we don't have any healing cards in the deck. I really liked having the energy accessibility of Roseanne plus our, basic energies. We only have 7 energy in the deck, but with 2 Night Maintenance and Roseanne, you have the energies when you want them pretty regularly. The other thing is that someone actually placed top 4, I believe it was AP Doodles, placed top 4 at a 2010 tournament recently, playing this archetype, but they had slotted Broken Time Space into the deck. I tried playing Broken Time Space in the deck. I found that it just wasn't needed. You have Rare Candy. Rare Candy seems to do the job pretty well for this deck, getting you your Pokemon out pretty quickly, but not benefiting your opponent. You don't want to give your opponent Broken Time Space, but it is, I guess, good against SP at the very least. As for this deck's matchups, it has pretty okay matchups across the board. It's going to struggle if decks can get Nidoqueen reliably into play. So against decks like Gardevoir, you do have to be more careful. And its worst matchup is by far Cursegar. Cursegar is a permanent trainer lock deck, which this deck doesn't do too well with. And it just doesn't really have a way to deal with Nidoqueen plus trainer lock. So that's the biggest issue of this deck. Overall, I'd say this deck is a tier 2 deck in the format. Gengar is a very good card, Machamp is a very good card, and Kingdra is also a very strong card. And putting them together, it creates a pretty decent deck. Relevant, kind of reminiscing back to Machamp from 2009, which was a similar style of deck. Thank you all so much for watching another deck profile on the Whimsicast. If you want to see more of these, more of them will come out soon, I promise, and I will see you in the next one.